My parents demanded that I buy a house to my newly married sister, otherwise they will cut off all ties with me. So I stopped talking with them, but they continue to shame me at family gatherings and on the internet. My name is Mary, and I grew up in what most people would call a typical middle-class family. Mom worked as an accountant for a local firm, and Dad was a project manager at a construction company. Then there was my younger sister, Daisy, 3 years behind me. Mary, you need to set a better example for your sister, Mom would remind me almost daily. You're the oldest, you should know better. That phrase was repeated so often that it felt like a broken record playing endlessly in my head. Whether it was about keeping my room tidy, acing my grades, or just behaving in general, the expectations for me were always higher. I still vividly remember one evening when I was 16 and Daisy was 13. We were both sitting at the dining table, supposedly doing homework. I was hunched over my calculus textbook, tackling complex equations, while Daisy was absent-mindedly doodling in her notebook, pretending to work on her English essay. Mom, Daisy called out suddenly, I don't feel like doing this essay, it's too hard. Mom walked in from the kitchen, drying her hands on her apron. Oh, sweetie, it's okay, she said with a gentle smile. You're trying your best. Maybe you can take a break and finish it tomorrow when you're feeling more inspired. I couldn't help but let out a small scoff, recalling how drastically different her response had been the previous week when I had struggled with an assignment. Something funny, Mary? Mom's tone immediately shifted to sharp disapproval. No, I said, quickly trying to keep my voice neutral. I just solved a tricky problem, that's all. Well, stay focused on your own work, she snapped. You know you need to keep those grades up if you want to get into a good college. That was another sore subject. For as long as I could remember, I had dreamed of attending Princeton. Their computer science program was world-renowned, and I'd worked tirelessly to maintain a 4.0 GPA, join every relevant extracurricular, and even start a coding club at my high school. But when I brought up Princeton during my junior year, my parents immediately dismissed it. Mary, be realistic, Dad said one night at dinner. Private colleges are expensive, and we need to save for Daisy's education too. You know she might need a little extra support. With your grades, you can get into any state school on a scholarship. That night, I sat cross-legged on my bed, surrounded by brochures and college applications, staring blankly at the glossy Princeton pamphlet. My best friend Sarah dropped by and found me like that. They shut it down, didn't they? She asked, sitting beside me. Yeah, I sighed. Apparently, I need to be realistic, so they can save the college fund for Daisy. Fine, they wanted me to go to a state school? Then I'd go to a state school, but I was going to make it work for me. I promised myself that I'd prove I could succeed on my own terms. Sitting there in my childhood bedroom, I made a pact with myself. I would thrive, not in spite of their limitations, but because of them. My parents had taught me one critical lesson. If I wanted something in life, I'd have to get it myself. State University turned out to be exactly what I needed. I threw myself into my programming classes, spending countless nights in the computer lab long after everyone else had left. By senior year, I had this idea that just wouldn't leave my mind. I'd noticed how many people struggled with keeping their daily tasks and routines organized. One late night, during another marathon study session, I started sketching out the concept for what would later become Taskmaster, a groundbreaking task management app that would change my life forever. I poured everything into that app. Between classes, weekends, and holidays when other students were partying or relaxing, I was debugging and refining my code. It became my passion, my obsession. After graduation, I made a bold choice. Instead of taking any of the job offers I received, I decided to pitch my app to tech companies. Most ignored me, and others politely turned me down. But then, a major tech company showed interest. I'll never forget sitting in their boardroom, surrounded by executives in expensive suits, watching as they tested my app. This is impressive work, the CEO said, leaning forward. Very impressive. The negotiations that followed were intense, but when everything was finalized, I walked away with a check for $5 million. $5 million. I remember staring at my bank account, my hands trembling as I processed what just happened. The first thing I did was buy a modest, but comfortable apartment in a nice neighborhood. The second was to launch my own mobile app development company. The rest went into savings and investments. I wasn't about to squander this opportunity. When I told my family about the deal, their reactions were, interesting. $5 million? Mom had to sit down, looking like she'd just seen a ghost. Our Mary, Dad said, shaking his head in disbelief. Daisy just stared at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. The family dynamic shifted almost instantly. Suddenly, I wasn't just Mary, the responsible older sister. I was Mary, the millionaire. And it didn't take long for that to matter. 2 years after I sold my app, Daisy graduated college and dropped a bombshell. I'm getting married, she announced during Sunday dinner. Tom proposed. I was genuinely happy for her. Tom seemed like a great guy, and Daisy was glowing with excitement. Without hesitation, I offered her $20,000 as a wedding gift. Mom cleared her throat. You know, Mary, weddings these days are very expensive. I glanced between them, feeling a bit confused. $20,000 is a lot for a wedding gift. But it's nothing to you now, Daisy said, her voice slipping into that familiar pleading tone she'd mastered as a child. And it's my only wedding. Don't you want your little sister to have her dream honeymoon too? We've been looking at this incredible resort in the Maldives. I sat there, the familiar weight of their expectations pressing down on me again. The thing was, they weren't entirely wrong. I could afford more. And this was Daisy's wedding, a once-in-a-lifetime event. After some discussion and a hefty dose of guilt-tripping, I caved. I agreed to pay for Daisy and Tom's honeymoon at the luxury resort in the Maldives, in addition to the $20,000 I'd already gifted for their wedding. But after the celebrations and their dreamy getaway, I started noticing a pattern in my family's behavior, one I couldn't ignore any longer. At first, it was subtle, disguised as lighthearted jokes or casual comments. But as weeks passed, it became increasingly obvious. For Mom's birthday, I bought her a designer handbag. She smiled politely, but then remarked, "Oh, this is nice." Although I saw a prettier one in the window of that luxury boutique downtown. But of course, this one is lovely too. Dad wasn't much better. I covered $1,000 to help with a new transmission for his car. Instead of a simple thank you, he chuckled and said, "For someone who makes millions, you're a little tight with your wallet. Could have thrown in some extra cash for new tires, don't you think?" They passed these comments off as jokes, but they stung every time. It felt like no matter what I gave, my intentions were measured solely against the size of my bank account. One Sunday afternoon, I was having coffee with Mom when she casually brought up my housewarming gift for Daisy, a $500 coffee maker. "You know," she said, "Daisy absolutely loved that coffee maker." But she did mention seeing a fully automatic espresso machine that would have been perfect for their morning routine. I set my coffee cup down a bit harder than I intended. "Mom, that coffee maker cost $500. "Well, yes," she said, waving her hand dismissively. "But when you have as much as you do, what's a few $100s more between sisters?" Meanwhile, Daisy and Tom had been back from their honeymoon for 3 months, but were still living with our parents. I found it strange, given that Tom worked in finance and Daisy had recently started a job as a marketing coordinator. "Why don't you two look for your own place?" I asked Daisy one day as I helped her organize her old high school bedroom, which was now overflowing with shopping bags from expensive boutiques. "Have you seen rental prices lately?" she said, flopping onto her bed. "It's ridiculous. We'd just be throwing money away." "But you both have jobs," I pointed out. Daisy rolled her eyes. "Not everyone can just buy an apartment outright like you did, Mary. Some of us have to be practical." The irony of her calling it practical to live rent-free with our parents while surrounded by designer bags wasn't lost on me. Mom had started dropping hints as well. Family dinners frequently included comments about the housing market. "Did you see that tiny house down the street? Sold for $500,000, she'd say, shaking her head. "It's outrageous what they're charging these days. Normal people just can't afford to buy anything anymore." She always put extra emphasis on normal people, glancing at me pointedly. One Sunday afternoon, I dropped by my parents' house, letting myself in with my spare key. The scene I walked into immediately set off alarm bells. Mom, Dad, Daisy, and Tom were all huddled around the dining table, papers spread out in front of them. As soon as they noticed me, they scrambled to shuffle the papers out of sight. "Oh, Mary, we didn't expect you today," Mom said, her voice a little too cheerful. I caught glimpses of house listings and mortgage rate printouts before they disappeared into a folder. "Just thought I'd stop by. Everything okay?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. "Everything's fine," Daisy chirped, but there was something off about her voice. Something she wasn't saying. I didn't push it. If they were looking at houses, it wasn't really my business. Maybe Tom's family was offering to help, or they'd finally saved up for a down payment. Either way, I was just glad they were finally planning to move out. A few weeks later, Mom called me. "Mary, we need to have an important family discussion. Can you come over tomorrow evening?" Immediately, my mind jumped to her ongoing complaints about the refrigerator. She'd been going on about it for weeks, how it made strange noises, the ice maker was broken, and food wasn't staying fresh long enough. The next evening, I arrived to find an oddly formal atmosphere. Everyone was seated in the living room like it was some kind of intervention. Mom and Dad sat together on the couch, with Daisy and Tom in the armchairs. An empty seat in the center of the room was clearly meant for me. "Mary," Daisy began as soon as I sat down, her tone unusually serious. "We've been having some family discussions." I nodded, bracing myself for the inevitable refrigerator request. "Tom and I have decided it's time for us to have our own home." "That's great," I said, genuinely happy for them. "That's definitely the right decision." Daisy exchanged a quick look with our parents before continuing. "Well, since you're so successful now and you have more money than you know what to do with," she paused for dramatic effect. "We've decided that you should buy us a house." The room went silent. I stared at her, convinced I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "It makes perfect sense," Daisy said, gaining confidence. "You have your own place. You bought it outright. Meanwhile, I'm still living with Mom and Dad. It's not fair." I glanced around the room, waiting for someone to laugh and reveal it was all a joke. But the serious expressions on their faces told me otherwise. "I don't understand," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why would I buy you a house?" "Because you're my sister," Daisy snapped, her voice rising. "You live in your beautiful apartment while I'm stuck here. You have over $1 million in the bank. I need my own place, and I'm not going to waste money on rent. You have the means to help me, so you should." I took a slow, deep breath, struggling to stay calm. "I'll tell you what I can do. If you need help with a down payment, I'll give you an interest-free loan. We'll handle it properly through my lawyer alone." Daisy jumped to her feet, her face flushed with anger. Are you kidding me? You're just jealous because I'm happily married and you're alone with your precious money. Her accusation felt like a slap. Jealous, I said, my voice shaking with disbelief. I gave you $20,000 for your wedding and paid for your honeymoon in the Maldives. That money could have covered my living expenses for a year. Oh, here we go, Daisy sneered, her tone dripping with sarcasm. Poor Mary, always counting pennies despite her $1 million bank account. You're pathetic. I earned every cent I have. I shot back, my temper flaring. I built my company from the ground up. I live within my means and reinvest in my business. I have employees who depend on me, responsibilities that you clearly don't understand. Responsibilities to everyone except your family, Mom interjected, her face painted with the same disappointment I'd seen so many times during my childhood. I'm ashamed of you, Mary. How can you be so stingy? Stingy? I laughed bitterly. I've given Daisy more money in the past few months than most people make in a year. And yet, Dad said, his tone sharp, you live in your nice apartment while your sister have to stay here with us. What kind of sister are you? I looked around the room at their angry faces. My own family, treating me like some kind of villain for not handing over hundreds of thousands of dollars just because they demanded it. Daisy stood up, smoothing the designer dress she was wearing, a dress I suddenly remembered buying for her as a birthday gift. Here's how this is going to work, she said coldly. Either you buy us a house, a nice house, not some cheap starter home, or you're no longer part of this family. It's your choice. Mom and Dad nodded in agreement. Tom sat silently, looking uncomfortable but refusing to disagree. I looked at each of them in turn, Mom, Dad, Daisy, Tom, the people who had raised me, grown up with me, and now they were trying to extort me. Without another word, I grabbed my purse and walked toward the door. Mary, Mom's voice rang out behind me. Don't you dare walk out that door. I paused, my hand on the doorknob, but I didn't turn around. Leaving meant losing my family, but staying meant losing something just as vital, my self-respect. Without hesitation, I opened the door and walked out, their angry voices chasing me down the driveway. The bombardment began almost immediately. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages and calls from Mom and Daisy. After a sleepless night, I finally gave in and read a few. How do you walk out on your family like that? Mom's first text read. After everything we've done for you. That last part made something inside me snap. I called her, my voice trembling with anger. Everything you've done for me? Like what, exactly, Mom? When I wanted to go to Princeton, you told me to figure it out myself. When I needed help with college, you said I should be independent. I worked 3 part-time jobs just to afford a tiny apartment with roommates. We raised you. Mom shouted back through the phone. We put food on the table, clothes on your back. That's called parenting, Mom. It's the bare minimum. Everything else, my education, my success, my company, I built that myself. While you were saving money for Daisy's college fund, I was working my ass off to make my own way. The following weekend was Aunt Linda's birthday party. I debated skipping it, but ultimately decided to go. Aunt Linda had always been kind to me, and I didn't want to let family drama ruin her day. When I arrived at the restaurant, Mom, Dad, and Daisy were already there, seated at the far end of the long table. I took a seat near Aunt Linda, and for a while, everything seemed calm. Then came the toasts. After Aunt Linda's friends finished their heartfelt tribute, Mom suddenly stood up, wine glass in hand, her cheeks flushed from too many drinks. I'd like to say something, she announced, her voice cutting through the quiet. About ungrateful children who forget where they came from. The room went silent. Aunt Linda's smile faltered, a look of horror spreading across her face. My daughter Mary, Mom continued bitterly, sits here in her expensive clothes, with her millions in the bank, while her own sister needs a house. She refuses to help her family. She's become a selfish, greedy. That's enough, Helen, Aunt Linda said, standing up, her voice firm. This is neither the time nor the place. But Mom wasn't done. She owes everything to us. And now she won't even help her sister buy a decent home. Oh my God, my cousin Rachel whispered beside me. Is she serious? Daisy jumped in, her voice shrill. She made me get a lawyer contract just to consider helping with a down payment. Her own sister. That was it. I stood abruptly, my chair scraping loudly against the floor. I gave you $20,000 for your wedding and paid for your honeymoon, I said, my voice ringing through the room. And now you're demanding I buy you an entire house? The other guests sat frozen, forks suspended halfway to their mouths, as the dysfunction of my family played out in full view. Mary's been more than generous, Aunt Linda interjected, her tone sharp. She helped pay for Tommy's diabetes treatment last year and Sarah's college textbooks. Other relatives murmured in agreement, but I could see the tension on my parents' faces. Cousin Mike chimed in, mentioning how I'd helped him with car repairs. Aunt Sarah added that I'd paid for her emergency dental surgery. With each example, Mom's face grew redder. So she helps everyone except her own sister, Daisy shrieked. I couldn't take any more. I walked over to Aunt Linda, hugged her tightly, and whispered, I'm so sorry about all this. Happy birthday. Then I left, the sound of arguing voices fading behind me. Later, I learned that the party essentially ended after I walked out. Guests quickly made excuses to leave, and several relatives called me afterward to offer their support. 2 days later, a Facebook notification popped up on my phone. My cousin Rachel had tagged me in a comment. Mary, you need to see this, it read. I clicked through to Mom's page and my stomach dropped. There it was, a public post for everyone to see. With heavy hearts, JN and I are officially disowning our eldest daughter, Mary. Her selfishness and ingratitude have shown us that she cares more about money than family. From this day forward, we have only one daughter, our beloved Daisy. The post had dozens of comments, mostly from family friends expressing shock and confusion. I sat there, staring at my phone, feeling oddly calm. They'd finally done it, turned their emotional manipulation into a public spectacle. Without hesitation, I blocked them all. Mom, Dad, Daisy, even Tom. Phone numbers, social media, email, everything. It felt like cauterizing a wound, painful, but necessary. What followed was 2 months of blessed silence. I threw myself into my work, started therapy, and began to heal. Then, one day, Aunt Linda called. "Mary, your mother's been trying to reach you," she said, her voice tinged with concern. "She says it's urgent. She seems desperate." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Somehow, I knew exactly who it was. "Mary," Mom's voice came through, thick with tears. "Please don't hang up." I stayed silent, waiting. "Everything's falling apart," she continued. "We're going to lose the house. The loan we took out for Daisy's wedding, we used the house as collateral. We can't make the payments anymore." My grip tightened on the phone as she went on. "Your father lost his job. We're barely making ends meet. Please, Mary, we need help. You're our only hope." I repeated her words back to her, my tone cold. "I'm your only hope? I thought you only had one daughter now." "You forced our hand," she snapped. "If you just helped your sister, you're a stranger to me now, Mom," I interrupted, my voice steady. "And strangers don't get to demand money from me." Her voice turned sharp and ugly. "How do you call your own mother a stranger? Have you no shame?" A bitter laugh escaped me. "Shame? You publicly disowned your daughter because she wouldn't buy your other daughter a house. A mother doesn't disown her child over money. A mother doesn't manipulate and shame her daughter into submission. You made your choice. Now live with it." I hung up before she could respond, my hands trembling but my resolve unshaken. The truth came out 3 months later during a Sunday brunch with Aunt Linda. "Your father isn't unemployed," she said casually, stirring her coffee. "He just switched to part-time work because he wanted a better work-life balance. And there's no bank threatening to take their house. They made it up to guilt you into giving them money." I should have been angry, but instead, oddly enough, I felt relieved. The manipulation was so blatant, so transparent, that it somehow made everything clearer. Through the family grapevine, I learned that Daisy and Tom had finally moved out of my parents' house and into a rental apartment. Apparently, they were saving for their own place, exactly what they should have been doing all along. "They still talk about you at every family gathering," my cousin Rachel told me over lunch one day. Daisy goes on and on about her selfish millionaire sister who wouldn't help her own family. "How do the others react?" I asked. Rachel laughed. "Honestly, most people try to avoid inviting them these days. Nobody wants to spend the holidays listening to them complain about you and their difficult lives." It was during that conversation with Rachel that something inside me shifted. I realized I'd spent years trying to prove myself to my family, striving for their approval while also serving as their personal ATM. Their love had always come with strings attached, conditions, price tags, and endless demands. That evening, I made a decision. I called Sophie, my old college roommate who had become a personal stylist. "I need a change," I told her. "A complete transformation." The next few months were a whirlwind. Sophie helped me revamp my wardrobe, replacing my practical programmer outfits with pieces that made me feel confident and powerful. I started seeing a high-end cosmetologist who helped me develop a skincare routine that made my skin glow. I even got a new haircut, shorter, edgier, and completely me. But the changes weren't just external. I began saying yes to things I'd always been too busy or too cautious to try. When my friend Jessica suggested a spontaneous weekend trip to Paris, I went. When my coding buddy Mark invited me to join his rock climbing group, I gave it a shot. I expanded my social circle, joining a book club and a women's entrepreneurship network. I also began mentoring young programmers, especially girls who reminded me of my younger self, eager, determined, and full of potential. Meanwhile, my company continued to thrive, and I found myself surrounded by people who appreciated me for who I was, not for what I could give them. 1 year after Mom's infamous Facebook post, I received an invitation to my cousin Tommy's wedding. My parents and Daisy would be there, but for the first time, the thought didn't fill me with dread. Last week, while going through some old photos, I came across one from my college graduation. I barely recognized the girl in the picture, so eager to please, so desperate for approval, so afraid to stand up for herself. I thought about how she'd feel if she knew where she'd end up, successful, strong, and finally, gloriously free. I took that photo and placed it in a frame on my desk. Not as a reminder of what I'd lost, but of everything I'd gained. Sometimes, walking away isn't an ending, it's a beginning. Sometimes, the family you're born into isn't the family you're meant to keep. And sometimes, the greatest act of self-love is simply saying no to those who treat your boundaries like suggestions and your love like an ATM.